The O in Oz stands for music always.
Okay, all right. Welcome to OzOkayPodcast, and this is episode 3. And today, Indoda must with the prof. Let me cook. So there was a time when I dated this somebody a while back. And the one thing that was interesting about this lady is that her and I connected, and I'm afraid to say spiritually. I want to mention it, but I still need to have a grapple of what spiritual connection means. But the kind of connection that I had with her was one whereby I could cry in front of her and she would calm me down, hug me, and almost sort of understand the process that I'm going through at that moment. Vice versa, she would also cry in front of me, and then I too would comfort her. There was a time where literally we could have a conversation without necessarily having a conversation, and we'd be connected in that space. I honestly thought it was a beautiful thing. However, as time went on, all of a sudden I keep hearing these words, and I suppose it has always been there. It's just that I was not conscious to that reality. Is that she would mention stuff like, oh, a man must. So case in point would be, a man must provide. And she would actually show it. For instance, would be whether at a restaurant or wherever it is, and there's an immediate expectation that I should handle the bill. There was no conversation prior to that, but it's just an automatic, you handle it. And she was comfortable with that. Also security. I should be the one who makes sure that we are secure. I'm the one who needs to be. I'm the one. It's a continuous, I need to. However, what was interesting is when she would say, I know my worth, and I know my value, and I know what I bring to the table. But I should always understand that she knows her worth, she knows her value, but I should automatically understand that and appreciate that. However, she doesn't have to show it. By the virtue of her saying that I know my worth and I know the value that I bring to the table, I should understand what that means entirely. Whereas from a man's perspective, Kings, is a constant. You have to always do and show. And it's almost whereby there's this figment, imagination. There's a figure there. And in that figure does not have a name, does not have a surname, doesn't have a birth date, doesn't have a location where they were born, doesn't have a height and characteristics. But every single time, that figure keeps changing depending on how she at that point in time feels. So it's always an added personality, an added character that I need to fulfill. So I've been grappling with this and trying to figure out how can I make sense of all of this. And luckily, I have a good friend of mine who has graciously approved to be interviewed and engage with me. And that is Prof. Ben.
The O in Oz stands for music always.
I just had to put that title, but again, that does not define you. We had an earlier conversation about that, which is why quite important that titles do not define a person. There's more to it. So this conversation about Indoda must, and coincidentally, I had mentioned earlier that I was at a summit yesterday, and what was quite interesting about that particular summit is that only towards the second part of the summit itself did we first start hearing toxic masculinity. The words toxic masculinity or toxicity or Indoda must. In actual fact, one of the presenters mentioned that. And for me, it was shocking because the whole conversation was basically around those particular words, but they were never mentioned. But it almost comes across as if it's a swear word. But when it's said, everyone must understand that it means this. How do you feel about that?
I think it's sad in some way that we are divided around male and female classifications, to start with. When I engage with humans, I'm curious about how they think, how they feel, and what they do. But I am saddened to experience that society has almost relegated humans to either being a man or a woman. And then there are differentiations in between, if you wish. But we are increasingly putting pressure on the man to be the man and the woman to be the woman. And I'm not sure that makes for a good societal mix.
Why would you not feel that makes it good for the societal mix? And I understand from a point that it's always positive to be very accepting. But then you have this categorical thinking. Each time you have to categorize and establish. And that also plays its role in your societal experiences. Case in point, within a family setup, there's that expectation that a man should do as categorically has been thought of as a man should do.
But I wonder whether we haven't, in this classification, for lack of a better word, whether we haven't lost our multiplicity as a being. So I am, amongst other things, a man. But I'm not a man. I am, amongst other things, as a human being, a man. So by keeping to the narrow classification of being a man or being a woman, it is no surprise that we have created expectations, rules, requirements around those narrowly defined roles, because it makes us feel safe. For those of us who are not intrigued by being a multi-leveled conscious, but to live predominantly one-dimensional, we align to that classification because it's easy to do that. It's more complicated and complex to see endless possibilities and to become part of a multi-leveled consciousness, where I am the one that must maybe nurture Mother Earth, where I'm the one that should appreciate and engage with the stars, where I'm the one who should be spiritually linked to God in whatever format it is, where I'm the one who should labor to survive, and I can go on. But these are not characteristics that should be aligned to me being either a man or a woman, because there's much more than being a man or a woman. So focusing on Indoda must as an example, my experience as a psychologist in the main is that it also causes a need for real reflection. As in some cases, I'm not sure it enhanced the ability of men in this regard then to be fully functional. Because there's almost sometimes a sense, well, I must respond to the needs of what mom wants from me, and I must respond to the needs of what even the aunties may ask from me, and I must respond to what my wife in waiting asks from me, and I must respond to what my wife wants from me. And in some guys, they are not able to face that conflict head on. So they just front load that. So you tell me I must, you tell me I must. And from the outside, it may look as if the guy is okay with it. Oh, he's strong. He's my boy. He's my man. But what I experience as the psychologist in some of those instances is that they are very frustrated and in some cases very angered. And that concerns me because the focus is not on me as a human and as just one individual, part of a bigger collective. No, I am the individual. I'm the Indoda. I'm curious, in a time of human history when we were living differently, maybe when we as men were the hunters, they tell us, we won't know. And the women were the gatherers. Maybe in that era, the Indoda comfortably said, I must do 3 things to keep my family alive. I'm not sure we're hunters and gatherers anymore.
You know, it's interesting that you're saying that because you're also including a time as a factor, as a possible factor. And the conversation now, and this is from my own point of view, is that it seems as it's changed to let's relook at this whole Indoda must, because it seemingly at some point it was a lot of it concentrated around your financial ability. And it was obviously known that for men, they had a better chance at being more financially viable and had gaining finances and the likes in comparison to their counterpart. However, now, with a lot of the affirmative actions and the EEE or employment equity, you're seeing that there is now sort of the balancing of the two. And to some point, you find where the woman is the main provider within the household, or alternatively, the woman is the one who's more decisive in taking certain decisions. But what happens when all of a sudden you still have this reality that is happening, but you still have this bit of this constant talks and opinions that are being made that not only must Indoda must, if you don't, you're lesser than.
Well, in some way, I think we as men are partly responsible for that perception or expectation to have developed. We almost wanted to outperform ourselves because we have a strong sense of coming from a history of being the hunter, of actually taking the lead. So we almost say to ourselves, well, how can I not do all of this? Because in it is something potentially very egotistical. I can move mountains because I'm a man. So I think men took on more than what was humanly feasible. And having been fairly good in it for a prolonged period, it became culture. Is it sustainable? The fact that we're having this conversation, the fact that men visit the psychologist to talk about the dilemma, flags to me a readiness for revisiting not just the role of the man, but the role of the man in conjunction with the role of the woman, and the role of the man and the role of the woman in conjunction with society. We are a much more layered society with much more dimensions. We are much more articulate at very different conscious levels. So I think it calls for a revisit of all these multiple ways we show up, and that we should find each other in that mix and not just keep finding us in what is historically grounded, I think, from a different era. As much as it may make some of us we're comfortable with that. I've had engagement with colleagues who were comfortable with it until it caught up with them.
Wow, that's interesting. That's interesting. It's sort of that conversation where a person only realizes that they're privileged when their privilege has been revoked. Where does toxic masculinity fit in? Because, I mention this because we constantly hear it, but sometimes I feel like it's either misplaced or misunderstood or deliberately misunderstood or should not be understood from the beginning.
I almost want to add to the latter.
Should not be
I
understood.
would not hope that we should bring in toxic masculinity into the Indoda must debate. Because in the intersections of sexuality and gender and power and race even, those are dimensions that relate to toxic masculinity. I would not hope that we necessarily align and almost triangulate these two experiences with each other. That toxic masculinity or components of it could be a symptom of a failed Indoda must experience. Psychologically, I almost want to say that's obvious. Because toxic indicates that something is broken, something is out of balance, something is out of control. So if the Indoda must experience blows out of proportion, whether it is because the individual Indoda can't hold it, or the pressure of the female energy, whether it's the mother or the aunts or the wife in to come, is overwhelming or overpowering. The toxic masculinity could appear, not as an excuse, but just as a reality. If we are under pressure as human beings, we will do anything to show survival. We don't ask what is accepted and what is meaningful and what is valued and what is none of that. It's a flight response and reaction. I must survive here. I'm not surviving. But I wouldn't hope that we link those two realities to each other.
I feel, and I completely agree with you, completely. But I think it's one of those things whereby if you don't step into the conversation and try lead it, the conversation will go ahead of you and determine who you are. And in most cases within the male society, I'd like to say, is that it's like you're born into it and you find yourself in it. And for those, who you might find yourself in these relationships whereby you hear these words, you're toxic. How does one, if ever, able to navigate themselves out of that conversation and out of that imposed reality?
That's a good point. So let me juxtaposition it with another comment. Do you think a parent of the 60s or the 70s or the 80s, even the 90s, do you think parents who disciplined their kids thought they were toxic parents?
I wouldn't think so.
No. I think they will take offense from that.
Yeah.
And yet today, our free country has created a regulatory framework that will identify all those parents that were disciplinarians in an authoritative way, most probably as toxic. So you're right. Is it imposed? Is it a perception of which I am submissive to? Because what defines really being toxic?
I mean, that's a really good question because...
And I also think it's culturally bounded in many ways. In certain cultures, looking you in the eye is confrontational. So in looking you in the eye, in a non-looking in the eye culture, you may sound confrontational, and being confrontational, you will sound toxic. I can't work with you, Ben, because you are toxic. You look me in the eye. But am I toxic? I'm toxic in terms of a certain context. So I think we must be cautious of labeling, because it's easy to label. The power of words is enormous. By saying you're toxic, you almost have no defense.
And what you've just said, I mean, I'm reflecting on the story that I'd initially spoke about and my experience in the beginning, to saying that, what is to be toxic? And then you break it down to a possibility of your cultural experience. And sometimes it's situational. And that's how I felt at some point, that if I had to say that, I'm tired of this title of Indoda Must. Great case in point with that lady. You're an amazing person. You're an amazing human being, and I'm connecting with you spiritually. But you're consistently telling me about I should do this and I should do that. And I feel like at any point in time, if I decide to rebel against that, I become the toxic individual that everyone talks about.
Or you are actually influenced by the toxicity of that lady that you're referring to.
Oh, okay.
Because if I confront you with what is my reality and my relevance, what I'm doing to your mind is I'm pushing you down and presenting it as the reality. Now that's toxic. That's toxic if I start considering your reality as my reality.
Wow. Okay.
So toxicity isn't standing on its own legs. It's got multiple threads linked to the rest of that context. I would almost say I can't think that toxicity can happen without the interplay with somebody and something else. If you take alcoholism, in many respects, alcoholism could be described as a toxic engagement. Not because of the individual drinking and the alcohol influencing their physiology, but like many things like drug misuse and alcohol misuse and many other behaviors related to that, there's a toxicity of it, but it's related to the environment. So often when you change the environment, the alcoholism has got no function anymore.
I
So
think,
is that person toxic?
Yeah.
Or has that person been exposed to toxicity and then reacted to that toxicity in a toxic manner?
Wow. Yeah. And I say this because on, I think, your social media, there's these memes and the likes whereby they say, water's water, but depending on what label is on the water, the price changes. So similar to perhaps you as an individual being in a toxic relationship, that you, in actual fact, do not know how much valuable you are. And you don't see it because you're in a situation whereby it's so toxic that you can't really see yourself for who you truly are. So it's not really you that's an issue, it's your circumstances.
Yes, let's put it in a broader context, at a macro level. If I'm in a country, in a social society, where I'm not able, as the leader, to create a flourishing environment for people to flourish, but it continues over time, who is toxic? The leader or the people? So I think we underestimate, when we speak of toxicity, of what gave reason to that as a response.
You know, one would say, to play devil's advocate, to saying that should not warrant an individual behaving in a certain way, regardless of whether the person is in a toxic relationship or not. So you also have the responsibility to act accordingly. Would you say that would be a fair statement?
Well, it's a powerful statement. So I think I'm seeing an increased response towards what you are suggesting, where Indodas with children, with a wife, would say, I choose to step out of this relationship. Where Indoda would say to a mother back home, I am not responding to this anymore. What is the consequence of that? In some cases, they get rejected. They become outcasts. But in themselves, they are comfortable and they're free. Because they focus more towards what kind of human do I want to be to my kids and to society. Because being toxic as a symptom doesn't make me feel good about the human that I am. And I think some people quite a number of people, already deciding I'm choosing to be a human first. And a human that will make a contribution and that will have a meaningful engagement. And if that means that I have to turn my back on what makes me toxic, well, surely then that's also within my right.
Sure. You know, you saying that brought even shivers down my spine. And the reason why I say that is because I really commend those who managed to choose themselves in the process to become better humans by, case in point, exiting a marriage, if you will, because they realized that marriage is highly toxic and they're not becoming any better humans out of it. And also, especially if you have children, they get impacted as well. They see the toxicity and that's being perpetuated. However, like I said, I really commend them because just to step out is also considered you being a very toxic man for having failed your family.
Well, I'm not sure you've been toxic for failing your family.
Okay.
You failed your family, full stop.
Okay.
But you actually choose not to become toxic.
Okay.
By stepping aside and saying, I can't live to this game, this rule game. So I'm stepping out of it. And for that, you could reject me. But if I see what happens to individuals who've made that choice, how they just came alive, then I'm saying that must be an option.
What if one says that that is a selfish option?
Well, if people benefit from that selfish option, why not? So people at work, the children, the neighbors, they meet a different person. A person that they can engage with, that can share, that can give, that has the capacity to do such. But not because they must. But because the energy flows are engaging. I think that's a dimension that I would like to raise psychologically. I think we underestimate the energy clashes. Where energy, and I refer in my world to red and black energy, where black energy is to let things die, and where red energy is to make things come alive, where black and red energy collides, you could get as one result toxicity. You can also get other symptoms, but for this debate, let's talk toxicity. So if I choose to be aware that here's a clash of energy, and I choose, and I'm not saying the one is right and the other one is wrong. I may be the black energy or I may be the red energy, it doesn't matter. But the fact that I'm sensitized, that my energy with a particular companion's energy field makes an eruption. The fact that I can be sensitive and disconnect from that, I think that is so powerful. Because even if that brings me loneliness because I disconnect, which also happens in some cases, at least I'm not harming, and at least I am not toxic in my influence to people around me. I know a number of lonely people, and they would say, I dare not engage again. Because they're convinced that their energy can harm. They can become toxic. And they don't want to be that. But I can't be toxic because I disconnect with you of what you expect from me, of which I am not able to respond to. Then you have to let me go. You have to free me. Otherwise, who's the toxic one? Otherwise, your imposing on me is toxic. Because you say, stuff you, Ben. I will smother you. But you will be what I want from you. That's toxic.
And, and if you look at it from the black culture, and I say that because, I hear you, but it's so tricky for us. And the reason why I say that is because there's so many expectations. And I suppose, to be conscious of self is to realize that some of these expectations in themselves are toxic. Or the Indoda must conversation. And
I would say it's possible, but I want you to be reflective whether it's truly, you say, us black people.
Okay.
So let me say I'm a white people. Who looked after my dad until he died at 87? Himself? No. Who gave him a house to live in? So I'm the Indoda. But I chose to do it. So when I was young, I was not able to do what I could do later on in my professional life. And I chose that. But I didn't contemplate whether he's rejecting me for that or not. I wasn't interested in that. Because I knew who I am and what I'm able to support with and what not. But it's incumbent on me, the Indoda, to accept or to alter, and if needed, to reject.
If you were able to provide advice for someone out there who's watching this episode and is caught between having to live this reality that they are in with the must, versus how's about I do something that liberates me? How should one go about it?
I think it's of paramount importance that we should be anchored within ourselves. So strong winds can blow me over if I'm not anchored. So my first question would be, tell me, what do you like of who you are? And when do you show up as that person, and where? And that for me will be the base.
Wow.
Where do I find you? The you that you want to be. Take me there. Because if you're there, then you can get yourself anchored and build around that. And I've even seen that in some relationships and expectations changed because the husband was able to say, I want to share with you what I am and who I want to be and what I can be for you, what I choose to be. And he never expected that the lady will accept that. So I think anchor yourself in what you like of who you are and talk to people that can allow that energy to become bigger, that field. And then go back to where people imposed on you. And I believe you will have a different conversation. And if you can't have a different engagement, then you have to make a choice. As selfish as it may sound, do I want to give meaning to society in what I am? Then you'd have to make a different choice. Because by staying there and being exposed to being toxic, you will become toxic.
Wow. I got no more questions. That was perfect. Any parting shots before we end?
No, I think as a people, I would obviously, in my engagement with people across different parts of the world, I don't find the difference intriguing, but I find the similarity intriguing. And I think even at a relational level, the Indoda, as the Mfazi, should ask, what amongst us make us feel good? And build more of that as a new reality, as opposed to having an expectation of something that really can really result in me and you becoming toxic.
Gotcha. Thank you a million times for honoring this call. Thanks so much, Ben.
My pleasure.
All right, and that is episode 3 of the podcast. Do like, subscribe on YouTube. If you got any questions, comments, please drop them in the YouTube comment section. Alternatively, I've put the email address if you have a request for an interview and perhaps want to take a different direction. This podcast is as much as mine as yours. So thank you for tuning in. Shots.
The O in R stands for music orgasm.